The fragile ceasefire in Gaza faced its first test today when Israel announced that it would halve the flow of humanitarian aid into the devastated enclave and delay the reopening of the Rafah border crossing with Egypt. Israeli officials blamed Hamas for what they called deliberate delays in returning the bodies of hostages, accusing the group of violating the terms of the Trump-brokered truce. Later that night, Hamas handed over the remains of 4 hostages to the International Committee of the Red Cross, bringing the total number of bodies transferred since the ceasefire began to 8, with 20 still unaccounted for. Hamas said it faced serious obstacles as some burial sites remained unidentified amid the vast ruins of Gaza. The Red Cross cautioned that locating and retrieving the bodies could take days or even weeks, describing the process as a massive challenge given the destruction across the territory. Israel responded sharply, cutting the daily number of aid trucks allowed into Gaza to 300 and postponing the opening of Rafah, both direct breaches of Trump's agreement. The deal, which had led to the release of the final 20 living Israeli hostages and nearly 2,000 Palestinians held in Israeli prisons, now appears to be unraveling just as it began. What was supposed to mark the start of Gaza's long path towards reconstruction and peace instead looks like the beginning of another descent into stalemate and recrimination. The collapse of momentum comes as hundreds of thousands gathered at Hostages Square in Tel Aviv, where families of the freed and deceased hostages called for the return of their loved ones' bodies. The massive rally, attended by U.S. envoys Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and Ivanka Trump, was framed as a celebration of Trump's peace, yet it carried a palpable undercurrent of unease. Standing before the crowd, Kushner declared that deal guys get results, but results, it seems, remain partial and precarious. Trump himself weighed in, as always, loudly and publicly. A big burden has been lifted, but the job is not done. The dead have not been returned as promised, he posted on social media in his trademark capital letters. Phase 2 begins right now, he said. That performative urgency captures the essence of Trump's Gaza plan, an exercise in spectacle where progress is measured in headlines and handshakes rather than durable outcomes and traditional diplomacy. The ceasefire's initial success, the release of the hostages, the partial withdrawal of Israeli forces, the brief lull in bombardment, was real enough to inspire relief across a weary world. But even in those moments of catharsis, the deeper structure of Trump's deal was visible, improvisational, ambiguous, and centered on Trump himself. It follows a pattern of previously failed peace efforts, particularly Oslo, which sought to defer the hardest questions to some imagined future. Like Oslo, the Trump plan parks core issues: Israeli withdrawal, disarmament, Palestinian governance, reconstruction, and calls that delay progress. Under Trump's framework, Israel was to pull back its troops from Gaza in stages, first to a yellow line, still covering more than half the territory, and later to a smaller security buffer zone. Yet Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's statements last week made clear that this was never the intention. He boasted that Israeli forces remain deep inside Gaza and controls all its dominating points, with no enforcement mechanisms and no penalties for non-compliance. The supposed withdrawal already looks illusory. Trump's design thrives on ambiguity. It lets him declare victory while allowing Israel to maintain effective control. It's the language of peace through dominance, one that turns a continuing occupation into a photo opportunity. Central to the plan is the demand that Hamas disarm, a condition the group rejected outright. Armed fighters paraded through parts of Gaza even during the hostage exchanges, a reminder of how fragile any ceasefire remains when built on distrust and humiliation. Trump's plan offered no viable process for disarmament, only vague references to cantonment zones where Hamas would supposedly surrender weapons under international supervision. The scenario is implausible at best. Hamas would never trust Israel, Egypt, or an American-led force with its survival. This is the peace of performance. Palestinians are asked to symbolically lay down their arms, an act of submission masquerading as reconciliation, while Israel's military posture remains intact. It's a one-sided demilitarization designed for optics, not stability. Trump's White House also proposed an international stabilization force to police Gaza once Israeli troops depart. In theory, this would be composed mainly of Arab and Muslim nations, supported by US logistics. In practice, no one knows what that means. Would it act under a UN mandate? Would it have the authority to restrain itself, to prevent Hamas from regrouping? Western diplomats have privately admitted the force might do absolutely nothing, its real function being symbolic, not strategic. That suits Trump's style, however. What matters is the image of global cooperation under his leadership and the potential for a Nobel Peace Prize. The optics of Arab soldiers patrolling Gaza, while he claims credit for peace through strength. The reality, as Lebanon's toothless UN force has shown, is likely to be stagnation and frustration cloaked in the language of order. Trump's pledge to rebuild and to energize Gaza is equally hollow. His promised Marshall Plan for the Strip has no budget, no timeline, and no oversight. The ruins of Gaza remain immense, its infrastructure pulverized, its population traumatized. Any rebuilding effort would require enormous funding and Israeli cooperation, two things the Trump regime's approach does not secure. And after previous conflicts, the most likely outcome is a trickle of aid mired in bureaucracy and corruption, while ordinary Gazans scavenge recycled concrete from bombed-out buildings. Even more striking is the total exclusion of Palestinians themselves from the process. The ceasefire and reconstruction plans were negotiated with Israel, Qatar, and Turkey, not with the Palestinian Authority, not with civil society, and not with any local leadership. The former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, bizarrely, has been mentioned as a potential transitional advisor. The Palestinian Authority, discredited and sidelined, watches helplessly as others bargain over Gaza's fate. This is deliberate. Trump's diplomacy treats Palestinians not as participants but as props in a geopolitical theatre. Governance under his plan is managerial, not democratic, a temporary transition with no destination. It mirrors the disastrous logic of post-invasion Iraq, where purging anyone tied to the old regime created chaos and extremism. The Gaza summit in Sharm el-Sheikh crystallized the absurdity. Trump arrived more than 2 hours late, transforming what should have been a serious diplomatic gathering into another of his televised coronations. He praised authoritarian strongmen like Egypt's Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and Turkey's Tayyip Erdogan as tough guys, cracked jokes about wealth and shoes, and turned the meeting into a stage for his own mythology. "I am the only one that matters," he quipped, half in jest, wholly in character. Trump's ceasefire, like his presidency, is less about policy than about performance. It demands repentance from Palestinians, but not restraint from Israel. It preaches de-radicalization without addressing occupation, and calls for rebuilding without justice, for peace without equality. And yet, as the aid trucks slow and the bodies remain unreturned, and the ceasefire frays, Trump's narrative remains intact. He alone, the self-styled world's greatest dealmaker, is the man who made it all possible. The tragedy is that his peace, like all performances, depends on the illusion holding just long enough for the applause. I'm Anthony Davis. You can find me on the 5 Minute News YouTube channel and podcast, on Wednesdays co-hosting Uncovered, and on Sunday on The Weekend Show with Midas Touch.